Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you all for joining. This is World Summit on the Information Society Forum 2022, thematic workshop on addressing social isolation and loneliness among older persons through digital interventions. My name is Masumi Ono, Chief of Social Inclusion and Participation Branch at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and I will be your moderator for today's event. First, a little housekeeping. This online event has been designed to be interactive, and we want to encourage as much conversation as possible on the topic. You can join the conversation in 3 ways. Use the Zoom Q&A function to ask questions, which will be answered in writing or during the discussion portion of today's event. Use the chat function to start conversations with fellow participants, and share your thoughts and comments on social media by using the hashtag #AddingLifeToYears. Please note this session is being recorded. All speakers' bios will be posted in the chat. Now, to kick off the event, it is my pleasure to invite my dear colleague, Ms. Amal Aburafe, Chief of Program on Aging Section in UNDESA. She will help set the scene on the importance of addressing social isolation and loneliness among older people in the context of our increasingly digital world. Amal, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ms. Humi. At the outset, let me warmly welcome the progress made over the last years under this forum in establishing and expanding the special track on ICTs and older persons. And I'd like to commend particularly the efforts of my colleagues Kazuki and Roxana in moving this discussion forward, which is vital for the significant and growing population of our society. So this year, the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging marks its 20th year milestone. And it's an important opportunity to generate renewed momentum for action to ensure that people everywhere are able to age with dignity and to continue to participate in their societies. Now, social isolation and loneliness have serious consequences on longevity, health, and well-being. We know that the experience of isolation and loneliness is not equal during life. Given that transitions are disrupting life events are more likely to affect older persons, social isolation and loneliness puts them at a particular risk. Now, MEPA recognized social isolation twice. Once in the context of social, cultural, economic, and political contributions of older persons, and another in the context of health promotion and well-being throughout life. What was also recognized, and remember that's 20 years ago, is that technology can be used to bring persons together and thereby contribute to the reduction of marginalization, loneliness, and segregation between the ages. Yet social isolation and loneliness among older people remain neglected in international policy deliberations. It's a patchwork at best. So for example, the General Assembly in its discussions on strengthening the rights of older persons touched on issues of isolation and loneliness in discussions around age and social exclusion, and also in discussions around the right to freedom from neglect. The Secretary General's reports on aging captured social isolation and loneliness in the context of situations of forced displacement, where older persons are either left behind or experience social isolation as a result of the erosion of social and support networks when they are displaced. And last year, delegates in New York negotiated and included reference to social isolation and loneliness in the annual resolution on aging within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, however, provided an opportunity to change the way in which social isolation and loneliness are addressed. Both topics were identified as important issues that cut across the 4 interconnected action areas of the decade. In its baseline report, there is a section dedicated to the ability to build and maintain relationships And it addresses the importance of having to tackle social isolation and loneliness to accelerate the impact of efforts by 2030 through building up evidence and understanding what older people need and what they want as priorities for action. Last year, under the umbrella of the decade and through joint efforts within the Interagency Group on Aging, a number of UN agencies, including DESA, ITU, UN Women, supported colleagues at WHO in a joint initiative to address these issues in a more sustained way. An advocacy brief on social isolation and loneliness among older people was published to raise awareness of this issue, provide an overview of what is known about this issue, identify policy opportunities to address the issue, and outline a strategy for the decade to address social isolation and loneliness among older people. The brief found that social isolation and loneliness among older people are widespread. For example, 20 to 34% of older people in China, Europe, Latin America, and the US are lonely. However, while social isolation and loneliness are harmful, they can be reduced. The brief included information generated by a range of stakeholders to inform the process of putting actions into place with impact. Now, against this background, we're living in an era of digital innovation. 2 years ago, the Secretary General laid out a roadmap in which all stakeholders play a role in advancing a safer, more equitable digital world. One of the key actions of this roadmap was to ensure digital inclusion for all, including ensuring equal access to digital tools by the most underserved groups in order to accelerate developmental progress. However, after the pandemic, it was clear, and rightly so, that the relentless commitment of the Secretary General to this issue continues. In his most recent report, Our Common Agenda, the UN chief said, "Let there be no illusion. COVID-19 may pale in comparison to future challenges if we do not learn from the failures that have cost lives and livelihoods." He added that too many people are excluded from the opportunities and benefits of technology, facing a bleak future if we do not act fast. The Secretary General also highlighted ongoing discussions within the UN on the development of norms and standards for information and communication technology. Moreover, the Secretary General called for holding a high-level multi-stakeholder summit of the future to advance ideas for governance arrangements in the areas of international concern, and digital technology was proposed as one potential track of the summit. So our discussions this week really should not be held in isolation from all what's going on at the international arena. We know that much more needs to be done in the area of ICT and older persons. Clearly, this is a vast agenda in an emerging field that is gaining momentum across public and private research and development sectors. And older persons must be part of that discussion, which is why I look forward to hearing from the experts joining us today and throughout this.
Thank you so much, Amal, for giving us the broader context and highlighting the consequences of social isolation and loneliness, linking to MIPA, the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, and SG's technology roadmap, as well as our common agenda. Next, to give us further background on the importance of digital technologies in our work to improve the lives of older people, their families, and communities, we have Ms. Roxana Whitmer-Iliescu, Senior Coordinator for Digital Inclusion at the International Telecommunication Union. Roxana, considering your vast experience in digital inclusion for over 20 years, and in your capacity as ITU focal point for older persons, could you share your views on how information and communication technologies can leverage the contributions of older generations by reducing their age-related vulnerability, and what is ITU doing to foster their socioeconomic development to achieve healthier, prosperous, inclusive societies? And in this context, could you tell us how can ICTs reduce older persons' exclusion and loneliness?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this question, which is quite exhaustive, I have to say. So In response to the first part of your question, I will simply say that information and communication technologies, what we call ICTs, are valuable enablers that can empower older person by offering them an opportunity to participate in this rapid changing world and allowing them to evolve in a healthy, independent, and participative way in the society. I would say, to explain how ICT are doing so and what ITU is doing towards achieving this global goal, in the interest of time, I would suggest, if possible, running a short video which encompasses both ICT's power to enable older person to participate and contribute to society, also to turn this misconception of vulnerable into valuable, and also shows our efforts here in ITU and the resources that we develop aiming to achieving healthier and wealthier, inclusive and age-friendly digital societies and communities. And after the video, just to assure you, I will complement with a short but concrete reference to the way that ICTs can also reduce older person exclusion and loneliness. So if the colleagues can run the video, I thank you in advance.
The world is digital and its population is aging. For the first time in human evolution, people aged over 60 have outnumbered children under 5 years old and are predicted to reach 2 billion by 2050. Older persons have always been an asset to their families, communities and societies. Nevertheless, they're being perceived as a vulnerable group, dependent on younger generations. The digital world can, no doubt, enable older persons to participate and contribute to society, turning this misconception of vulnerable into valuable. In an interconnected world, information and communication technologies, or ICTs, can empower and contribute to healthy, independent and fulfilled lives of present and future older adults. ICTs, if provided in accessible and user-friendly formats and platforms, can be valuable enablers for older adults, helping them to overcome more easily age-related limitations, including hearing, dexterity and visual impairment. For example, accessible smart televisions, allowing users with hearing aids to enjoy all types of entertainment content with their families. Use of virtual assistant technology to obtain all types of information and access online services. Use of zooming features to increase the font size to facilitate reading. The digital context reduces distances and avoids isolation and loneliness. It also facilitates active participation in all aspects of today's society. Therefore, by building accessible and inclusive digital environments, all users can adapt technology to their specific abilities and needs. For instance, they can buy products more easily, using the e-commerce process, manage their finances and payments through e-banking, continue lifelong learning thanks to opportunities offered by e-learning platforms, contribute to society, including sharing their experiences and enhancing constructive dialogue between generations. Moreover, in 2020, the Global Coalition on Aging estimated the global market value of older adults, the so-called silver economy, at $17 trillion and growing. There is a huge business opportunity for this untapped market. To help member states create accessible and age-friendly ICT environments, the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, has developed the report Aging in a Digital World: From Vulnerable to Valuable. The report not only raises awareness of the trends and good practices, but also provides concrete guidelines to ensure healthy, happy and valuable aging, and empower older persons as active participants in their digital communities and societies. For more information on ITU's work and resources on digital inclusion, please visit www.itu.int.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for this. And now just to comment on how can ICT reduce older person exclusion and loneliness? In my opinion, as I stated in our joint advocacy brief publication on this topic with Dessa and colleagues from UN Women, this advocacy developed under the leadership of our colleagues in WHO. So I believe that governments, policymakers, international organizations, and we all stakeholders, including private sector, should make information and communication technology available, affordable, and accessible to older persons who wish to be connected, but also ensure that those who wish or simply do not have a choice either to remain offline do not suffer exclusion as a result. And furthermore, in their policies, strategies, and everything that they are implementing related to ICT should include accessibility requirements relevant to digital information products and services, aimed at reducing social isolation and loneliness among older persons. I would say that policy and decision makers should also provide appropriate digital knowledge and training to allow older people to adopt new technologies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Roxana, for highlighting ICTs as an enabler, offering opportunities and turning vulnerable into valuable. Amal and Roxana have given us the broader context, but what evidence is actually out there on the use of digital technologies for addressing social isolation and loneliness? To speak to this question, I would now like to invite Dr. Christopher Migden, Technical Officer of WHO, and Dr. Vivian Welch, Editor-in-Chief of the Campbell Collaboration, to go over some of WHO's recent work in this area. Over to you both.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting us today. And I will start very briefly, and then I'll hand over to Vivian to continue on this topic. So when we started working on social isolation and loneliness a little over a year ago, it quickly became apparent to us that, largely due to the COVID pandemic and the measures to counter it, that digital interventions would have to be a priority. But when we started going over the evidence, we noticed that although digital interventions have sometimes been found to be effective, findings were often mixed and inconclusive, and the actual studies were scattered in different places and difficult to locate for policymakers and practitioners. So we decided that an important first step would be to systematically map the evidence on digital interventions to reduce social isolation and loneliness among older people. And Vivian will tell you more about the evidence and gap map she and her team have produced in a moment. But this mapping exercise is part of a wider sustained effort we are making at WHO in the areas of social isolation and loneliness, and in the area of elder abuse as well, to develop what's called an evidence architecture. This is made up of a series of interrelated evidence synthesis products, like the evidence and gap map, and like guidelines we're starting to work on, which aim to distill high quality evidence in a form that's accessible to policymakers and to practitioners. The ultimate aim of such evidence architectures is, first of all, to institutionalize the use of high quality evidence in policy and in practice. And secondly, to avoid wasting what are scarce resources on interventions that don't work. And in many fields, this means that more than half the interventions, sometimes up to 80% of the interventions, have been shown not to work. So that's the angle we're coming at it from. Over to you, Vivian. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Chris, and thank you for the invitation to be on this panel, and for the great setting the scene from Roxana and Amal. I want to just tell you briefly about the evidence map that we've developed we use the Campbell collaboration approach to map digital and remote interventions to mitigate social isolation and loneliness for older adults. We searched broadly in health and social science databases, and what we found was quite a large evidence base. I'm going to share my screen just to show you what our map looks like. On this map, there are 97 systematic reviews and 103 primary studies. And this map is not interactive. I'm just showing you a slide, but you can go to this tiny URL at the top if you want to explore the map. But what I just want to walk through is that on this map, you can see the interventions are listed on the left as row headings. So for example, social cognitive training is one type of intervention we mapped. And the outcomes are listed across the top as column headings. Each of the bubbles that you see shows the number of primary studies in yellow, number of randomized trials, and the green and blue bubbles represent the number of systematic reviews coded for their quality. And in the top left corner, you can see a button called filters, where you can restrict the evidence to, for example, studies from low and middle income countries or studies of women. And you can explore the map further. And within each of the bubbles, you can click to get structured abstracts of each of the studies. So this type of map allows people to look at where there is a lot of evidence, where you can find high quality systematic reviews to answer or address policy questions, and also where there are gaps in the evidence where you might need to focus on primary research and primary studies. I think I'll stop there so we have time to get through the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris and Vivian, for sharing the evidence architecture to help policymakers and for providing some basis for our work ahead. Next, I would like to welcome two representatives from diverse sectors to discuss how we can move forward together across research, policy, and practice to foster social connections for older persons through the effective use of digital technologies. Mr. Chad Bro, Vice President for Healthcare Transformation at Home Instead Senior Care, and Dr. Spencer Schooler, Co-founder and Trustee Loneliness New Zealand Charitable Trust. First up, Chad, could you talk briefly about your background and how your work relates to today's topic?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. I represent Honor and Home Instead, two companies that came together last year. Home Instead representing 30 years of home care to aging adults. We have been working with aging adults, allowing them to age in place and remain at home in an analog world that has turned digital. And I can tell you some of the things that we're experiencing with, I believe, social isolation and loneliness are not just a digital problem, they're an analog problem that have existed for 30 years and more. So we've existed for about 30 years. We are located across 1,200, we have 1,200 offices worldwide in 13 markets, including Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and North America. And our relationship-based care model is intended to offer health and independence to older adults, combating loneliness and social isolation. Last year, we were acquired by Honor Technologies, a company that has a strong digital presence that's existed for the past 8 years. And Honor was really created with its focus on caring for the care professional, recognizing that if we provide an amazing employment experience for care professionals, people who go into the home and support family caregivers, as a workforce, we can provide an amazing care experience to those we serve. So bringing together the high tech and the high touch that Honor and Home Instead have really positioned us in how we can expand the world's capacity to care. which is our mission of our company, bringing together resources and support in a centralized way that support family caregivers who bear the burden often of caring for aging adults who become more and more frail throughout life. So I hope to be able to contribute to this panel, talk a little bit about our experiences, both from our experience on the analog side of our history and now with a much more digital presence.
Thank you so much, Chad, for your perspective and the need to address social isolation and loneliness within the care experiences. Now, Spencer, could you tell us more from your point of view as a head of civil society organization doing work on the ground in this area? You're muted, Spencer.
Thank you for having me today. Loneliness New Zealand is thrilled to be here today and I'm representing it. And we're a member of the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection. We're a national charity dedicated to loneliness across all demographics in New Zealand, including seniors. Our mandate includes social isolation-induced loneliness. Our focus is on prolonged or chronic loneliness rather than fleeting loneliness. Our primary activities are loneliness counselling, education, and advocacy. We were founded in 2018 at a time when our recently elected government was looking to move from making decisions based on a financial cost-benefit analysis to one based on a well-being analysis. To give context to the importance of our session today, as you know, there is a close relationship between well-being and loneliness. In New Zealand, historical analysis showed that the adult population not feeling lonely was one of the top 3 drivers of well-being as measured by life satisfaction. The first 2 being good general health and enough money to get by. Whilst trillions of dollars is globally spent on traditional health, education, and employment initiatives, which address those first 2 drivers of well-being, relatively little resources are focused on the next biggest driver of well-being as measured in New Zealand, that being not feeling lonely. So this year's World Summit theme of information and communication technology for well-being, inclusion, and resilience is most apt. I'm most grateful to be invited and I look forward to our discussion today.
Thank you so much, Spencer. I'd like to now get a conversation going with our roundtable participants. Let me throw in a question. What do you see as the main opportunities and challenges in the use of digital interventions to address social isolation and loneliness among older people? Could I maybe start with Chad?
Great, thank you. I will start with one opportunity, one challenge. Amal said earlier, in terms of the challenge, it's a patchwork at best. And so I think one of the things that we have to really focus on is just the fragmentation that exists in this space and how difficult it is to navigate resources and pull together what works. Right now, we have to really be focused on how we support older people in this family caregiving journey. It is really extremely difficult to navigate. So how do we put together a more frictionless, seamless environment in which people can access the resources necessary? Healthcare across the world is one of the most complex, fragmented industries that you can navigate, whether you're in the United States or Europe. And I believe that's one of the challenges with putting together the digital technology that will be effective, is just how do you navigate all the analog fragmentation. The other challenge I would just say is the caregiving shortage. From a global perspective, there is a massive shortage of professional caregivers who are trained and qualified and all the nuanced care needed for people with dementia, Alzheimer's, and diseases of aging, and how we can better bring forth a workforce that will care for this generation. It's estimated by 2040 that we will need 13.5 million additional workers to care for the aging. And digital interventions can bring more people together to this workforce if done effectively. I like to tell the story. If you think about the ride app technology that has brought more transportation to the public, and that how we can use a similar type of approach to bring more people to caregiving. In the pre-Uber days of 2010 in New York City, there were 463,000 daily trips made by taxi drivers. Just 6 years later, ride-sharing apps provided 300,000 rides, and taxi drivers provided also 300,000 rides on top of that. And so the entire capacity for transportation was increased through digital technology platforms. And in a similar way, I see how technology could bring together the resources, expanding the world's capacity to care with caregivers and workforce in a way that will reduce social isolation and loneliness.
Thank you. Spencer, how about you? Opportunities and challenges. Oh, the microphone again.
Sorry, I assumed it was automated. Okay, with respect to access challenges, what we see in New Zealand is a need for access to devices and access to the internet, which can be a challenge for our rural communities. And we need it at an affordable cost, which is a challenge for seniors on low incomes. With respect to user challenges, what we see is a lack of skills and confidence to use digital technology, a realistic fear of online scams, and language and cultural barriers. With respect to opportunities to address these user challenges, organisations in New Zealand are using digital literacy classes for seniors, student sessions where school or university students help seniors one-on-one to learn how to use technology, such as texting and video calling, in-home tech support services to upskill seniors who have devices, maybe given by their children, but are unsure how to use them, and simplified devices designed for seniors. With respect to opportunities to stay meaningfully connected, research down under shows seniors prefer face-to-face communications, but resort to digital interventions as a means of staying meaningfully connected. This could be video conferencing family and friends or texting grandchildren. With respect to opportunities to get meaningfully connected, the New Zealand experience is that the key of getting seniors meaningfully connected by digital means is not the device or communication tool, but rather online human facilitation. Senior organisations in New Zealand are using community classes online that have facilitated interactive discussions. This matches seniors' desire to learn with social connection. Seniors singing groups facilitated by a lead singer. Online pen pal projects that are facilitated by a coordinator that matches pen pals and protects against online scams. Cognitive assimilation therapy, where an online facilitator chooses a topic and the group have a facilitated session for 45 minutes. And similarly, time slips, which is a facilitated group session with a facilitator, scribe, and an open question. The discussion is followed by scribes telling back the story at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Vivian or Chris, anything from your research perspective on the challenges and opportunities?
Sure. I'll start with this question, and Chris will chime in for the subsequent questions. I think, our map shows there really is an opportunity in building the evidence base. There's a massive and growing evidence base out there. The challenge is to focus this enthusiasm on the areas where we need the best research, and also how to get what evidence we have into a more discoverable form so that people can find it to use it to inform their decisions. So the map is one such tool that makes evidence discoverable. And some of the gaps we identified is exactly what the panel has been raising, which is many of the studies and reviews, most of them actually, do not assess accessibility, affordability, availability, or things that Spencer, you just mentioned, the possibility of adverse effects like privacy and risk of scams. We also found some areas that would be ripe for new systematic reviews. For example, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is known to be effective in some areas, has very little evidence applied to the question of social isolation and loneliness. And finally, we found very little assessment of health inequities and how there may be differential effects of these technologies across the population, both within and across countries. So these really are areas to prioritize for future research. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Anything from Roxana, Amal, from a UN perspective that you would like to highlight here?
Pleasure. So for me, without any doubt, ICT could play an important role in alleviating social isolation and loneliness among older adults. And I will begin with opportunities because I'm an optimist person. So for me, the sky is the limit, not only in the use of frontier technology. So I'm referring to the augmented or virtual reality or artificial intelligence, but also in applying them to projects and services that are relevant to older people. Health services have been the core and the most developed solution targeting older adults, while many areas such as, for instance, leisure or entertainment are still underdeveloped. So for me, this could result into a business opportunity for all, by public, private sector, and not only. For instance, public sector can ensure a healthier society, so reduce costs, increase jobs in area of health, caregivers, ICT developers, and for private sector to provide tailored solution for older person can increase their business value. Finally, even for academic member, they can develop and taught a curriculum that will generate immediate job opportunities for our young generation that is so struggling with the job challenges in these days. For the challenging part, I think most were already addressed by the previous speakers. I would only highlight again that we are still far behind, unfortunately, in ensuring appropriate connectivity, affordability of the cost of the connectivity and the device and the knowledge, and accessibility of ICT. So this including not only accessible equipment such as the smart technology, but also regarding provision of digital skills knowledge for older adults and capacity to use the ICT in a secure and efficient way so that they will be truly empowered by technologies. This is from my side.
Thank you. Amal?
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Yumi. Well, I'd like to build on what Roxana and colleagues have said. I think all the opportunities that were highlighted should be informed by and guided by what older people themselves want. You know, and I think our role at the United Nations is that we are able to offer that platform to bring this group into conversation with decision makers, because around these topics, there's a lot of assumption of what older people need, whether it's from the public sector and even sometimes from the private sector as well. And here, this will start peeling off layers of an onion, if you wish. What does it mean for older people who do not want to engage in this? Like, how can we bring them on board into this conversation? What does this mean to older persons in low and middle income countries where the infrastructure isn't there? Or maybe this is the last thing on their mind, where the basic needs are what, in their point of view, need to be addressed first, you know. So there are many layers that open up, and I think engaging older persons themselves in this conversation is key, which is why I complimented the work that has been building in the special track, because we see it expanding year after year to bring in more and more the voices and views of older persons into this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amal. So with all these challenges and opportunities, clearly we need to be working together across sectors. And so my question is, how do you think we can best work together across practice, policy, and research to advance this area and also given the context of UN Decade of Healthy Aging. Chris, would you like to start on this question?
Sure, thank you. So just to say that, as Amal mentioned earlier, several agencies have already been collaborating on this topic, or the broader topic of social isolation and loneliness. We also address digital interventions to an extent in the advocacy brief we produced last summer, and a link to which Kazuki put in the chat earlier. So we've already started collaborating, but I think we should continue to take advantage of the convening power of the decade, of key decade partners like UNDESA, like WHO, like ITU and others, to keep coordinating our activities in this area, to increase our collaboration, and also make sure that research, policy, and practice is aligned as possible and as informed by high quality evidence as possible. And I would suggest, and this is something we can consider and discuss, that we might create some kind of subcommittee within the decade of healthy aging that addresses social isolation and loneliness and focuses on digital interventions in this area for older people. We have a number of other subcommittees, and we might consider setting up a committee on this topic. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. How about you, Chad, from your perspective? How can we work together across different sectors?
Yeah, I want to commend Roxana in the video that she shared earlier. I think there's a story that has to continue to be told about the opportunity that exists. GCOA estimating that this is a $17 trillion opportunity is such that I think we have to attack some of the inherent bias that technology and the aging don't coexist and don't go together. The history of both of our companies experienced that. 30 years ago, our founder of Home Instead was working for a global franchise company. He brought the idea of home care to that company, and they respectfully declined. He went on to found a $2 billion company that has existed for 30 years. And you fast forward 23 years later with Honor Technologies, and as those founders sought to look for investment, a lot of people looked at them and said, technology and older people, that just doesn't go together. And we're just missing a huge opportunity on how we can impact this and expand the capacity to care for people. I would also just like maybe to build on what Amal said about bringing in older adults to this conversation as design is done, but I would add that their family caregivers be a part of that conversation. This is a really interesting dynamic when you're using user experience design, that you have to bring in both voices. It's a family conversation. I need to have a conversation with my children about what my wishes are and what my needs are, and that we work together collectively as I age. And I think it's important for designers in the technology space to really understand that dynamic. That's something that Home Instead knows a lot about in the history of our 30 years. Those would be my just bits of advice as we work together on this problem.
Thank you. Yes, that's really important and really a foundation for where our work should emanate from. Spencer, how about you from your perspective?
I'd like to tell a story from a New Zealand perspective, which gets more into the nitty-gritty about the importance of relationship, practice, policy, and research. It's not going to be exactly ICT, but it's going to be very close. And this is a developing story, so it's not at this level of Vivian and her highly detailed and research on interventions. But this story begins during the first lockdown in New Zealand in 2020, where we undertook a survey of the incidence of loneliness across different demographics. We collected more data than we needed at the time. When we went back and mined the data for any further insights, we found one strong correlative relationship between loneliness and seniors aged 75 plus. We found that the unweighted Spearman Rank correlation coefficient for the association between New Zealand seniors aged 75 plus and hearing loss was 0.34, Even more pronounced was the relationship between males, New Zealand male seniors aged 75 plus was 0.42. Now, this was a remarkable correlation for such a complex phenomenon as loneliness. And it was supported by a probable causal pathway from hearing loss to inability to create meaningful relationships to loneliness. At the time, and this shows the importance of being connected to practice, we talked to a practitioner about this relationship, and she responded that this is what we witness and experience on a daily basis in retirement villages and care homes. Those with hearing loss are always withdrawing from socialising to avoid feelings of embarrassment or, in their words, becoming a burden for others. Supporting this finding, in March 2020, the first systematic review of the international academic research found that the association exists between hearing loss and loneliness in older adults. Further, the World Health Organization's first World Report on Hearing, published a year ago, explained that the relationship with both children and adults can be damaged because of hearing loss. Now, modern hearing aids are typically digital devices, and so are digital interventions. They're not in the pure sense that we think of it in terms of ICT, but I just want to raise it because it's another close by relationship. So what does this mean for policy? Well, assuming this holds up, and this is not at the level, again, I must emphasize, of where Vivian's work is at, you could say, okay, if a senior reports feeling lonely, they should be immediately given a hearing test so that can be ruled in or out. Or if seniors age 65, 70 or 75, then assuming this research holds up, it could be given free hearing tests. So all I'm trying to show with this example is it's very important that the bits all work together, and this particular story itself is not complete, but it's just an alternative way of thinking about some of the issues of social isolation and loneliness facing seniors age 75 plus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Spencer. I think a lot of issues have come up in this interactive portion, but it would be important and useful maybe to kind of have some sense of a common goal if we are to work together across sectors. So from each of your perspective, what would you say are the priority areas that we need to address within the broad field of using digital technologies to address social isolation and loneliness among older people? Could I please maybe let me start with or anybody, would anybody like to start?
I can do it. In my opinion, all areas are critical, and on my view, should be considered in a concomitant way by the respective stakeholders and involved partners. So I believe that policy and decision makers should include this topic first as a priority in their respective agendas, while involving targeted end users, so in this case, older person, in implementing appropriate policies and strategies. Further studies needs to keep up with innovation and role of these recent emerging technologies such as Internet of Things, augmented or virtual reality, artificial intelligence, because all of them can play in alleviating social isolation and loneliness. And finally, I would put a special emphasis to be given to prevent the use of ageist bias within the technology, as well as to ensure that technology is used according to human rights principles, including the rights of older adults or older person to dignity, autonomy, privacy, and informed consent. Of course, there are a lot of things to say, but I'm sure that perhaps other colleagues may wish to complement.
Thank you, Roxana. Chris, would you like to come in?
Sure. So I think in terms of research, given the evidence in this area is mixed and often inconclusive, I think the priority is to build up a strong evidence base. And that's what we're trying to do with these evidence and gap maps, and with the guidelines we're going to start work on interventions to reduce social isolation and loneliness, which will also cover digital interventions. But I think there's another priority as well. And for the broader field of social isolation and loneliness, and also for the field of digital interventions, and that's to reframe the topic of social isolation and loneliness as a truly global issue, and not just as an issue of relevance to high-income countries. Currently, countries in which it's highest up the policy agenda, like the UK, like Japan, like the US, are almost exclusively high-income countries. And here I'll show a slide quickly. Here we are, you see it? Yeah. I assume you see it. And this is...
We can't actually see the slide.
You cannot?
No, we cannot. Would you mind clicking on share screen? We try that again.
I did. Is that better?
There we go.
My fault, sorry. I clicked, but not all the way. Yeah, so you see on this slide, these are the studies included in the evidence and gap map and the countries in which they're conducted in. And you see here that there's a gross imbalance. Most of them, it's the green ones, that's the countries with have the highest number, 31 or more, is only in the States. 21 to 30 studies, Canada, Australia, the UK, and then 1 to 10 studies in red, and you see these other countries, and you see that large parts of the world, primarily low and middle income countries, have no studies on this topic. Most of Africa, much of South America, large parts of the Middle East. I'll stop sharing. Sorry. There we are, stop sharing. So this really is a priority, I think, making this a global issue. And the epidemiological data is really clear. Social isolation and loneliness are pretty much just as prevalent in many low and middle income countries, and they have the same devastating consequences. Consequences for mortality, for physical health, and for mental health. So these areas of the world are just as much in need of effective interventions, including effective digital interventions, as elsewhere. So for me, I think this is one of the big priorities, as I said, reframing this as a truly global problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Spencer, you've heard Chris say this should be reframed as global issue. Anything to add from your perspective in terms of priorities?
Thank you. Yes, there is a few. Again, there's a number. With respect to research, given the multifaceted nature of loneliness, research structures and incentives need to promote and reward cross-sector engagement and collaboration. With respect to sharing knowledge, there need to be forums like this one that exchange information across sectors. For example, in New Zealand, we have a combined conference of the Association of Gerontology and one of our leading seniors charities, Age Concern. With respect to technology, there is a tendency with technology to look for solutions that are scalable. If they're not scalable, they are not a solution. However, when it comes to digital interventions that enable new meaningful connection for seniors, the success stories have at their core human facilitators who are frequently volunteers. So we may need to combine the best of technology and humans rather than not proceed with a digital intervention because it is not fully scalable. There needs to be more important practical solutions co-designed for seniors. With respect to future policy, we need to focus on policies that give the biggest improvement for the cost. Loneliness and socialization or exclusion need to be embedded as considerations across policy decision-making. To facilitate practical policy, politicians and policymakers need to spend time with seniors so they understand their environments and circumstances. For example, helping aging looks different to seniors than the television commercials you see for retirement villages. To inform policy, there needs to be meaningful central and local government engagement with community groups, service providers, and representatives from the public. There needs to be funding that feeds seniors' souls rather than just biomedicine. We need to ensure those seniors who are unable to engage with technology are not excluded, since that makes them more socially isolated and lonely. We need to provide different options for seniors to upskill their digital literacy. We need to address issues of affordability, as already been mentioned, for devices and internet access. We need government initiatives to reduce the threats of scams and support those who have already been caught out. And lastly, we need policymaker recognition that citizens have the right to age and die well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. And what about you, Chad? We're almost coming to an end. So if you could also sort of, as you speak about priorities, share with us what you would like us to take away from this conversation.
I guess I would say we have to meet people where they're at. The pandemic has pressure tested the world in terms of how we interact with seniors, and I think it's taught much of us who maybe are not in that age bracket what loneliness and social isolation feel like, as we've all been isolated in our homes at times through the pandemic, and how do we help use technology as a bridge in a way that meet people where they're at, that is thoughtful about the user, that gives them choice, gives them independence, and is person-centered. And as Chris said, it's kind of the perfect storm, you know. So it's loneliness and social isolation are really impacting every segment of the population as you see suicide rates increase and mental health challenges that exist. And at the same time, we're having a population that's an inverted pyramid in terms of the aging process. So I think as we continue to focus on both those areas in all aspects, not just the digital environment, but the analog as well, that policies are focused on these two big global challenges.
Thank you, Chad. Amal, what is our takeaway from this session?
Thank you, Ms. Humi. Well, I echo the messaging of what Chris highlighted and what he saw in research, taking it to the global level, because this really mirrors what we see in politics and the decision-making process. And I think that making sure that this conversation spills over into other global processes that are taking place is also key to keep that momentum growing. Thank you.
Vivian, how about you? Give us your takeaway.
I think, it's great to see the commitment and the excitement to the decade. And as Chris said, I think this is a tremendous opportunity to really make that evidence that's available, accessible and discoverable, using mapping and make, a priority for future research to continue building this evidence base on isolation and loneliness.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Spencer, then Roxana, then final word for Chris. Spencer.
I have nothing specific to add other than to say I think it's been a really good session, and I really appreciate the inputs that we got into this session today. Thank you.
Roxana.
So from my side, I'm also very, very enthusiastic, and I believe that UN Decade of Health Changing provide us all a unique opportunity to address this issue in a collective manner, to take advantage of our different expertise and to jointly reach the goals of this decade and of this topic in particular. And finally, I would like to say that the beauty of this is that, in fact, we're working also for us, for the present and future generation of older persons. So I think what can be more beautiful and more engaging than to work for yourself. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Chris.
Thank you. I'll say three quick things. One is continue increasing the awareness of this issue. I think people who are familiar with this issue, they know that it has terrible consequences for longevity, physical health, mental health, but most people don't know. And I think we have to focus on increasing the awareness of that this is a serious issue. It's not a soft issue, it's a serious issue with serious consequences. Second, and here I'm repeating myself, we have to strengthen the evidence base. And we're trying to do that, but I think we have to do this. And this is a medium and long-term objective. And I think the third important thing is that I think partners within the decade should continue collaborating. We started collaborating, we've collaborated very successfully, but we have to build on that and continue collaborating within the decade. So I think this decade really offers a unique opportunity to address this issue over the next, 8.5 years or whatever, however much time is left. So those would be my 3 suggestions and take-home messages. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now that brings us to the end of this fascinating dialogue, and a big thank you to all of our roundtable participants, as well as those who joined us today. If you'd like to learn more and get involved, there you will find some resources and links in the chat. In the meantime, let's all keep working together to create a world where all people can live long, healthy lives. Thank you all so much.